This one is about a woman who spent years getting a building approved at every level of the government you can think of, and then got fired at the opening ceremony by someone who did not know what a single one of those approvals actually meant. The government came looking for her, not the company, the government. Stay to the end for my take, and I want yours in the comments. My name is Priya Nair. I was the Licensed Nursing Home Administration and Director of Regulatory Compliance for Lakeshore Senior Communities, a regional operator with 9 facilities across Central Ohio. That title sounds bureaucratic until you understand what it actually means. I was the person the Ohio Department of Health called at 7 in the morning when a survey was escalating. It means I could recite the federal conditions of participation for memory care units from memory, not because I memorized them, but because I wrote our compliance protocols against every subsection. My daily work looked like this: reviewing incident reports against our 2,567 deficiency tracking system, coordinating with CMS regional surveyors on plan of correction timelines, maintaining our fire marshal certifications across all 9 buildings, and personally managing the credentialing pipeline for every licensed nurse and aide we employed. I kept a binder, physical, 3 inches thick, for every facility, updated weekly, cross-referenced quarterly. If a state surveyor walked through any door at any lakeshore property, that binder told me exactly what they would find and exactly what we would say. The crown of my career was the new Willowbrook facility, 140 beds, memory care specialized. I spent 2 years on that project, negotiating the conditional use permit with the Glenmont City Council, navigating the state licensure application, personally appearing at 4 public hearings to address neighborhood concerns about traffic and emergency response times. The operating license listed my name as Administrator of Record because Ohio Administrative Code 3701-17-04 requires a licensed nursing home administrator on every permit. My memory care certification was one of 3 active in the region. There was one clause in the conditional use permit I was particularly proud of. Section 9, subsection C, a community benefit provision. I negotiated directly with Councilwoman Aguilar. 12 beds reserved at reduced cost for Franklin County's low-income elderly residents requiring memory care placement. It was buried in the permit language. Nobody at corporate ever read it. I maintained it because it was the right thing to do, and because Councilwoman Aguilar shook my hand and told me it was the reason she voted yes. Then Lakeshore's VP of Corporate Development decided his son needed a leadership role. Garrett Olmsted arrived in March with a title that did not exist before he needed it: Director of Strategic Expansion. He was 29. His background was commercial real estate leasing, strip malls, mixed-use retail, flex warehouse space. He had never set foot in a licensed care facility before his first day. But Garrett had a vocabulary. He talked about census optimization and bed utilization pipelines. He described residents as occupancy units. In his first all-hands meeting, he presented a slide deck about building a scalable care model that would position Lakeshore as a growth phase disruptor in the senior living ecosystem. I sat in the 3rd row and watched a man who did not know what a plan of correction was explain how he was going to double our bed count in 18 months. I counted. He used the word ecosystem 11 times. He never once said resident. His first real move was restructuring what he called our regulatory friction. He wanted to streamline the compliance review process to reduce what he described as onboarding latency for new facilities. He scheduled a one-on-one with me in the second week. He sat across from me in the conference room with his laptop open to a spreadsheet that tracked beds the way a property manager tracks vacant apartments. Priya, I want to talk about reducing regulatory friction in the onboarding pipeline, he said. We're leaving capacity on the table. Which onboarding pipeline? I asked. Are you referring to the state licensure application process, the CMS certification timeline, or the conditional use permitting sequence with the municipality? He blinked. All of it. The whole regulatory ecosystem. We need to move faster. Garrett, do you know what a 2,567 deficiency citation is? He stared at me. Do you know what happens when CMS flags a facility for immediate jeopardy? The stare continued. Then he smiled, the particular smile of someone who believes confidence is a substitute for competence. That's why we have compliance people, he said. I'm focused on the growth trajectory. That told me everything I needed to know. He did not understand that the compliance people and the growth trajectory were the same thing. That without a clean survey record and an active operating license, his growth trajectory was a line on a spreadsheet pointing at a building the state could padlock shut. Over the next 6 weeks, he pushed 3 senior nurses into early retirement by restructuring their schedules without understanding ratio requirements. Our infection control coordinator quit. 2 families transferred their parents to a competitor after Garrett eliminated the family liaison role he called a non-revenue position. I documented everything. Not because I was planning anything, because documentation is what I do. He fired me at the Willowbrook ribbon cutting, the ceremony I organized. 42 people were present. City council members, the fire marshal, 2 local news crews setting up behind the podium, families who had already signed admission agreements. Councilwoman Aguilar was standing 6 feet away, holding a pair of ceremonial scissors. Garrett pulled me aside near the refreshment table. He had a cardboard box, not metaphorically. A literal cardboard box with my name on a sticky note. Priya, we're moving in a different direction with the compliance structure, he said. We need someone who's more aligned with the growth phase culture. Your approach is too regulatory heavy for where we're headed. Too regulatory heavy for a licensed nursing home. I looked at the box. I looked at the podium where the Willowbrook sign had my compliance certification number, printed on the operating license displayed in the frame. I looked at Councilwoman Aguilar, who was watching us with a very still expression. Of course, I said. I understand. I took the box. I smiled. I did not mention the operating license. I did not mention that my name was the one on the state permit. I did not mention Section 9, Subsection C, or the 12 reduced cost beds, or the 6-month compliance review that would trigger in 114 days, requiring sign-off from the named administrator of record. I shook his hand. I walked through the lobby of the building I had spent 2 years bringing into existence. The automatic doors opened, and the April air hit my face and I kept walking until I reached my car. I sat there for 90 seconds. I let myself feel it, all of it, and then I started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I could see the news crew filming Garrett cutting the ribbon. This man converted a storage closet into a meditation space during a federal survey. I need you to subscribe because if this channel disappears, nobody's going to document these people and they'll just keep getting away with it. The first call came 19 days later. My former assistant, Dana, voice tight. The state licensing board sent a notification. Willowbrook is flagged for operating without a qualified administrator of record. Garrett told corporate it was a clerical issue. It was not a clerical issue. Ohio Administrative Code requires the named administrator to be actively employed by the facility. When Garrett fired me, the permit became non-compliant. Not eventually. Immediately. I was repotting a Meyer lemon tree on my back porch when Dana called. The soil was warm. The afternoon was quiet. I told her I was sorry she was dealing with this, and I meant it. Week 3. A CMS regional surveyor arrived for an unannounced inspection. Routine triggered by the new facility opening. Nobody at Willowbrook could locate the plan of correction templates because they were in my binder system. The binder system Garrett had called an analog bottleneck in his second week and told my assistant to digitize. She had not finished. The originals were in a storage closet that Garrett had converted into a wellness meditation space. A meditation space in a memory care facility with a CMS survey pending. I was reading a novel on my porch. A former colleague from our Hilliard facility texted me that the surveyor had cited Willowbrook for 4 deficiencies in the first 2 hours. Week 5. The domino I had dreaded. A family member of a Willowbrook resident contacted the Glenmont City Council directly, concerned about staffing changes and the departure of the administrator whose name was on the license they had been shown during the admission tour. Councilwoman Aguilar's office opened an inquiry. That inquiry triggered the 6-month compliance review early. The review required sign-off from the administrator of record. That was me. I no longer work there. Here is where I almost broke. Dana called me on a Tuesday evening, panicked. She said Garrett was demanding that anyone, find out how to transfer the administrator of record designation to their interim director, a woman named Sharon who had an assisted living license, but not a nursing home administrator license. Dana said Sharon was willing to sign. Priya, can she sign? Would that work? I opened my mouth to explain the difference between an assisted living administrator certificate and an NHA license under Ohio Revised Code 4751. The explanation was right there. Reflex loaded, the way your hand reaches for a railing. I closed my mouth. Dana, I can't advise on that. I don't work there anymore. Sharon signed. The state rejected it within 72 hours. The conditional use permit review escalated to a full council hearing. Councilwoman Aguilar's office called me on a Thursday morning. Not Lakeshore. The city. They were retaining an independent regulatory consultant to assess whether Willowbrook could maintain its conditional use permit and operating license. They wanted someone who understood the facility's compliance history, the permitting conditions, and the state licensure requirements. They wanted the person whose name was already on the documents. I negotiated a consulting rate That was 4 times my former salary, billed hourly, with a 6-month minimum engagement. The city council approved it unanimously. I walked back into Willowbrook on a Monday morning wearing a charcoal suit I had bought specifically for this. My old badge was deactivated. I signed in at the front desk as a visitor. The receptionist, new, hired after I left, asked me to spell my last name. The conference room held Garrett, Lakeshore's general counsel, 2 board members, and Councilwoman Aguilar. Garrett was sitting at the far end of the table. He had the particular stillness of someone who has just been told to let other people talk. I presented my assessment. Clinical, specific. I walked through the 4 CMS deficiency citations, the lapsed administrator designation, the rejected license transfer, and the staffing ratio violations that had accumulated in 7 weeks. Then I got to Section 9, subsection C. The conditional use permit includes a community benefit clause, I said. 12 beds reserved at reduced cost for Franklin County's low-income elderly population. This clause was a material condition of the council's approval. It is currently not being honored. 3 of those beds have been converted to standard rate placements. Councilwoman Aguilar set her pen down. The room understood. This was not just a compliance gap. Garrett had not streamlined a regulatory process. He had eliminated the person who maintained a promise the city made to its most vulnerable residents. The reduced cost beds were not a line item. They were the reason the building existed on that piece of land. Garrett opened his mouth. I was never briefed on. It is in the permit, I said. Page 14, Section 9, subsection C. He did not finish his sentence. I recommended conditional reinstatement of the permit with mandated independent oversight, restoration of the community benefit beds, and a requirement that any future administrator be a licensed NHA with active memory care certification. The council accepted every recommendation. CMS opened a formal investigation the following week. Lakeshore's board stripped Garrett of any oversight authority over licensed facilities. His father, the VP who created his position, issued no public statement. Just silence. I still consult for the Glenmont City Council. The engagement renewed twice. I also took on 2 other municipalities in central Ohio that needed regulatory oversight for new senior care developments. I built a small firm around it, 3 people, all former administrators, all women who left positions where their expertise was treated as overhead. Willowbrook is still open. The 12 community benefit beds were restored. A new administrator, licensed, certified, competent, was hired after I submitted my candidate recommendations. Garrett was moved to a role in Lakeshore's corporate office, with no direct reports and no facility access. He left the company 8 months later. Last I heard, he was back in commercial real estate, leasing flex warehouse space. Councilwoman Aguilar sent me a note after the hearing, handwritten on city letterhead. She said the 12 beds were serving 9 residents and 3 were on a waiting list. Some people have asked me why I did not just help Lakeshore directly when they called, why I made them go through the city, why I let weeks pass with families terrified their parents might lose their placements. I think about that. I do not have a clean answer. I have the answer that lets me sleep. which is that the city council's trust was the only mechanism strong enough to guarantee the community bed survived. But I know what it cost the families in the meantime. I carry that. My lemon tree fruited in October. Small ones, 6 total. Enough for one good batch of lemon curd. She could have picked up the phone and told them exactly what licensing code they needed. She chose not to. Weeks went by with families not knowing if their parents were going to lose their beds. Was she protecting the long game or punishing the company at the expense of the people she built those beds for? Drop it in the comments. Subscribe if you haven't already. And well, here is my take. The thing that gets me is the phrase, "That's why we have compliance people." That is the sentence that burned this whole thing down. Because what he actually said was, "I do not need to understand how this building stays open. That is someone else's problem." And then he fired someone else. That is like pulling an alarm fire out of the wall because you find the beeping annoying and then being shocked when nobody warned you about the fire. The man looked at a license administrator the way you look at a printer. Useful when it works, replaceable when it jams. Except this printer was the only reason the state let the building exist. I'm not even mad at him. I am fascinated. How do you fire someone at their own ribbon cutting and never once ask yourself what they did to earn one?